Hello, I'm Shaun Richards of Notayesmaneconomics, and there's a couple of things to talk about today that are interrelated. We'll start with yesterday and the public finance figures in the UK, and there is a link between them and what's going on in Venezuela right now. If we start with the UK, we are in a much better phase for the public finances. This of course depends on your perspective, because some people don't like the idea that we have a deficit at all, particularly at this stage of the economic cycle. However, it's a lot smaller than it was. So far, this financial year, so from April to July, as it's measured, the UK's borrowed £12.8 billion. A fair bit lower than last year, which is lower than the year before, and so on. We might be on course now for less than a quarter, maybe a fifth of what we borrowed at the peak. So quite a change, and of course the economy's larger now, so relatively it's smaller. This poses a few questions though, and one of the things that I'll throw into the pot, because it doesn't get much of an airing, is one of the changes here has come about because of policy of the Bank of England. One area where we've saved a lot of money is on what we pay for our debt. If we look back on forecasts of what we might be paying compared to now, we're paying half. Slight exaggeration, a bit over a half, but that sort of order. And this matters because we're paying in the low 40 billions a year rather than maybe 80 billion. So this is the impact of the QE, the Bank of England, era of low interest rates. In essence, very cheap for the UK government to issue debt. And that's been a big factor in the change. That's where we are. We've had some economic growth. People can say that there are various issues around where we are now, and of course there are, like house prices. But in terms of the public finances, things look better. Now, if we skip forwards to Venezuela, we see here various warnings. One of them is, right in my sphere, central banks. On the one hand, we've seen the Bank of England do quite a lot in the UK, and so far, things haven't blown up. What I mean by not blown up is there have been high house prices and things like that, but the system hasn't fallen apart. If we skip to Venezuela now, there's lots of causes of what's happening at the minute, but one of them is in essence that the central bank has monetised government debt. Money's poured into the economy, and now we hear another problem. As we stand, because of the revaluations of the currency, because of the fact that there are very few prices at the minute, actually we don't really know what's going on. Anyone that reports on Venezuela right now can report down at the basic level and say what someone thinks of where they are, if they own a shop, a worker or something like that. But in terms of the collective, we don't know. Right now, for example, people are reporting they don't know what the price is. Shops can't open. So then all sorts of measures fall down, don't they? We don't know what inflation is. We don't know what the money supply is. You don't know what GDP is, and so on. At times like this, we see a run into what you might call a safe haven. What are the safe havens? Well, here the thing is relative. We've got to throw that word in. The US dollar, for example. Irony of ironies, of course. One of the issues is Venezuela and the United States here as to what's happened. But people are pouring to US dollars. Another thing being reported this morning is movement into cryptocurrency. And I don't necessarily mean here the government's move. I think they're calling this the petro, whereby they have their own cryptocurrency now, would you believe this? And it seems to be linked to oil as well. So quite complicated. But moving on from that, ordinary Venezuelans moving into other cryptocurrencies with one called Dash. So it just seems to have been a bit of Dash for cash here. People moving in and taking advantage of that. That provokes, again, something to consider, because if we look at the cryptocurrency environment this year, they've bounced all over the place themselves, mostly down, sometimes up. Even that's preferable to what's happening in Venezuela. So what we have is a failing of what we consider to be the economic system. Do we know what price is? No. Do we know what the money supply is? No. As we go through the various numbers, we can't possibly calculate them. People are throwing out numbers right now. But what does inflation at 100% mean? Apart from the fact it's quite plainly hyperinflation. One difference that we're seeing here compared to the Weimar issue in 1923 is there's the Twitter era, selfies and things like that. People are posting piles of banknotes next to what it would buy, chicken, a toilet roll, that sort of thing. Whereas back then, of course, there were pictures of money in wheelbarrows. Why is this an issue? Well, because if we move on from the issues of whether it being able to produce enough oil or that sort of thing, which is one of the triggers for this, it poses a warning for central banks. We've seen them do extraordinary things in the West, but Venezuela is a warning that you can't do what you like. You can't just throw things about all over the place, because you end up debasing what you're putting out in the first place. If you look at what money's supposed to be, store of value, how does that work with inflation like this? Medium of exchange, how does that work? And so on. Unit of currency, what is the unit? So there are, for everyone else, warnings out of the Venezuela situation, but obviously for the poor people themselves, incredible amount of suffering. They can't get money, which even if they then can get it, they can't spend. It's very Kafkaesque. So all we can do is wish them well.